Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is Sonship Establishment, and this is session number 66. We got down to verse 16 as we're reading through Psalm 139. The way I understand this psalm, and if you want to break it somewhere differently, that's certainly fine, but I see a break at verse 17. And now I see a shift in where David has taken this conversation now in a different way. So let's take a look at this next PowerPoint beginning at verse 17. How precious also are thy thoughts unto me, O God. How great is the sum of them. If I should count them, they are more in number than the sand. By the way, now he's not talking about what he's talking to his father about. Now he's talking about God's thoughts to him. Do you see? That's where I'm seeing the shift. If I should count them, they are more in number than the sand. When I awake, I'm still with thee. Surely thou wilt slay the wicked, O God. Depart. Now that surely, you understand, there's an expectation behind that, okay? Surely thou wilt slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, therefore, ye bloody men, for they speak against thee wickedly, and thine enemies take thy name in vain. Do not I hate them, O Lord, that hate thee? And am not I grieved with those that rise up against thee? I hate them with perfect hatred. I count them mine enemies. Now look at verse 23. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. There's that single way again. Now, what I see David doing here is saying, I've made a decision about some, by the way, there's one thing that God absolutely accomplished through David, and because he was so successful at it, when he said, I want to build a house for God, God said, no, I'm not going to let you do it. Your son's going to have to do it. What was it God really did through David for the nation of Israel? He defeated all of their enemies. And there was so much blood on his hands, he said, you're not going to get to build the house, but your son will. But David, let me tell you what, he wiped out everybody that decided they would rise up against Israel. So when you read David, I'm saying this because I don't want you going home, oh God, you know I hate them with a perfect hatred. Surely we will slay the wicked. I don't need that. I can see him at the police station. Well, Brother Mike was teaching us. Oh, brother. This is dangerous, isn't it? David. the epitome of this group. David is engaged in this kind of thing. And God is utilizing him that way. He's utilizing Solomon in a different way. But he's really asking about something, and he's wanting to know, have I chosen a right path here? Is this really the way everlasting? I mean, that's real. There's the kind of questioning that we're kind of looking for. Because as I told you, you're going to be taking the education and you're going to be applying it now in a way. David, you know what? He's going to do the same thing. He's going to take what he's learned and he's going to make some decisions. But he's got to make sure that those decisions are considered by his father to be a good path, okay? And so as we read down through this, that's where I see the change that's going on there. Because at first, David's saying, hey, here's what's going on with me. But at the end, he's wanting to hear from his father, what do you think about what I'm saying now? And that's a different issue. Now, it's the inexperience that we're going to have. It's not going to be any different for any of us. But the inexperience that we'll have when we first get into the education, that's going to make it so we want to be sure that we're headed in the right direction. Later, and that's why I said to you, every prayer you pray won't be accompanied by, Father, I need you to search my heart. They won't all be that way. But there'll be a lot of it in the beginning as you're getting your feet on the ground, so to speak, by utilizing these skills. But as you get more and more adept at utilizing those, that prayer for the searching of the heart is not going to happen as frequently. In fact, for these first things, it may not happen near as much as it does for the later things. Because I'm going to tell you, these last two require a lot more than the first two. I'm not saying the first two aren't important, but you don't even come on the radar for the adversary. I'm talking about personally. Let me make this distinction. There is a policy of evil that is generally at work in the world. Everybody is affected by that one. But as far as him looking at you as an individual and saying, I'm going to have to do something about that one, yet you don't even come on that radar until after you get this third skill under your belt. But once you get that third skill under your belt, you do become a real threat to what Satan is doing in the world. So when that happens, that's going to change. By the way, that's what this last section is going to equip you to handle before you get over there and that happens. But to get ourselves back on track here, it's that inexperience that's going to make us say a lot of times, have you ever been doing something and the person that's been showing you how to do it, you just make a few little moves and you go, is this right? Am I doing this right? You keep getting that reinforcement a lot because you don't want to foul this up. And that's kind of the way that it's going to happen here. Now, remember that all this is happening in the context of your sonship education, and really all you're doing is you're determining, is this a good way or is this an evil way? And that's what's there. Because the temptation is going to be, see, I've said things to you in the past about things that are off in the future, and it's going to be real easy to take some of those things and combine them with something they're really not meant to combine with. You remember I told you at the very start of sonship, I said, there's going to come a time when you're going to have to make a decision about something and you're going to wonder, I don't have any idea which is the best decision to make. And I said, but the education is going to make it where you're never again going to ask the question, what is my Father's will? Out of 4 possible choices, you'll know exactly which one he would choose, and you would know exactly why. But if you take that and try to combine it with your understanding of the searching of the heart, you've combined 2 things that aren't meant to be combined. That's the danger of me actually saying things out there in the future, because I know that, because this sounds close to what we're talking about. I'm going to get an answer from my Father. But this answer is to only confirm or deny that what you're thinking is a good path or a bad path. That's all that is. Let me take you back to Proverbs 2, to the exhortation. He keepeth I should have highlighted these in yellow too, paths, plural, of judgment. Those are, by the way, and why did he say paths of justice or paths of wisdom? Because judgment is that sonship skill in which you have more than one correct or right choice in front of you. See, in justice, it's a matter of right and wrong. It's pretty clear cut. But in judgment, you get to a place where I have a number of things that I can do, and of these 3 things, any of them are okay. And to be able to begin now working in that area in your life is going to begin to equip you for something that's a real challenge to the adversary. But there are paths, plural, of judgment, and preserveth the way of his saints. That singular is like what we're reading in Psalm 139. Lead me in the way everlasting. Now, there's lots of wrong ways. In fact, when we read in this chapter last week, we saw the ways of darkness. More than one way of darkness. And we know that's true. And preserveth the way of his saints. Then shalt thou understand righteousness and judgment and equity, yea, every good path. And your Father wants you to be able to discern every good path. Later, he'll work on you about, out of all those good paths, how to discern between them. But right now, it's about locating all the good paths and knowing everything else your Father considers to be an evil path or a wicked path. And that's really what's at stake in that. And as we talked about, just call it to your remembrance, You have that evil man and strange woman who are going to be working very hard to get you off of one of those good paths onto a whole different path and get you to choose a whole different way. And believe me, you're going to need to have absolute confidence that this curriculum can handle it, and confidence that what your Father says is true, because the paths that you're going to be shown are going to be very alluring. They're going to look good. They're going to sound good. And if you can't discern between what your Father thinks is a good path and an evil path, you're likely to get pulled down the wrong path and going the wrong way. And He knows that. And by the way, almost everyone you know is going to counsel you to go down that wrong path. It's going to make perfect sense to the world. And the wisdom of this world, if you don't, and by the way, if you ever go against the conventional wisdom of this world, you will be viewed as a kook. You're going to have to do what the world does. You're going to have to spend your time the way the world does it. And if you don't, they're going to look at you and say, what in the world is wrong with you? And that's why I said, you won't have to go out of your way to make a difference between you and the world. The education will take care of that for you. You will be a kook before it's over. So there you go. I want to illustrate this in a way just to make sure we have this nailed down before I get into those finer details. Let us suppose that John's going to go down and he's going to buy a car, and he's got $5,000 to buy a car. And so what he does is, he goes down there, and on this car lot there's 200 cars. But he's only going to spend $5,000. You've never not just spent $5,000 on a car a day in your life, have you? Does it run? Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Point taken. We'll move on with the illustration. So he's got $5,000 and he's going to get a car. But out of the 200 cars on the lot, he can buy 10 cars that will cost either $5,000 or less. For the sake of this illustration, just think, he has 10 good paths. There's 190 bad paths. Now, he may look at that Jaguar, and when he cranks it up and the computer thing comes on that screen and the Jaguar runs across the dash, which it does on the new Jaguar, he may look at that and say to Courtney, it's only $89,000. And Courtney is saying, you've got 5. This is a wicked path. But for him, you understand. Now, don't confuse this illustration. I'm going to go somewhere with it. I'm not telling you you're going to use the searching of the heart to say to your Heavenly Father, which car should I buy? This searching of the heart pertains to your education, not to all those other decisions you're making, right? God's hopefully saying, look, if you're wondering whether or not you should buy the $89,000 Jaguar, there are other things you should already possess to tell you whether or not you should do that, right? But in the 10 decisions that he's got, John can say, you know what? I earned the money. It's my decision. It's my car. I'm going to be driving the car. Which one do I take? As far as this part of your education is concerned, God doesn't care which one he takes. Now, is there one of those cars that would probably be better for him than another? John's really not the good example of this, because really what I should have done is I should have picked somebody that just got married, that is, they're just starting out their life and they don't have a lot of money and all that kind of bit. And we all know John's loaded. So with that in mind, he's a bad illustration. But if he had to take a choice, He could pick any of them he wanted. But really, one of them gets better gas mileage than another, right? And the tires on these are really in much better shape than the tires on this one over here. And the insurance for this sporty one is going to be a lot more than the insurance on this one over here. And this one is really going to be more likely to hold his family than this one over here. There's a whole lot, and how much would it cost to maintain these cars? And what, you understand all those issues. So at the end, you would kind of weigh all that out, and you would say, you know what, I would really like to have this sporty one, and it's one of the 10 paths. And if you want to, I mean, you can do that. And with your Heavenly Father, He will say, you're an adult son, make a choice. But later, this is where experience comes in. The next time you go to get a car, you go, I am not paying that high insurance on this gas guzzler anymore. Now I'm going to do this. And you know what? Your experience now kicks in. It's kind of like your education, right? And so your education later is going to teach you to be a little choosier. Well, as I'm talking about this, of course, one car is better. But right now, all it's really about is discerning which of these 200 cars is a good path and which of these are an evil path. And in the illustration we've given, you've only got 10 good ones. But you say, even if I choose the one that has the higher insurance with the worst tires, that has the least amount of room, that's the worst on gas, we are talking John here, aren't we? Okay, but anyway, sorry, I should be doing this to Ron, but it was just too easy. If he does that, his Heavenly Father is not looking at him, and He's not going to, even though He's saying, I'm not going to just tell you what to do, God's not finding loopholes either. You know, if John says, well, I'm wondering if I ought to get this one, and, you know, the Heavenly Father goes, not a good one. He's not doing that. You're going to make a choice. And then guess what? You'll live with that choice. There you are. That is all that's being discussed here. So when John asked the Father to search his heart, this is an easy conversation. Father, I have $5,000. I see 10 cars here that I can purchase because I can get any of them for $5,000 or less. Then the Father is going to confirm that if he chooses out of one of those, he's on a good path. That's all he's after at this point. If John even brings up the Jaguar in the conversation to the Father, he is going to communicate back to John, not one of the good paths. Actually, God won't have to do that. Courtney will do that. God will just amen what she said. That's where your suffering comes in. Exactly right. Y'all are learning. Y'all are picking the sonship right up. The men are, okay. Now, let's take this over into the sonship realm. You're going to be learning these 4 decision-making skills. They're going to be broken into small parts for you that will comprise a whole. You're going to go through this, and with each one of those skills, now you'll be taught it in a very specific arena, but then you're going to look at that skill and you're going to say, you know what, I think I can utilize this in a completely different area of my life. And then you're going to make some choices. And by the way, remember we did this last week. God's not choosing the path. The Son is choosing the path. All God is doing is keeping the path and preserving the way, right? It's your job to choose the good path. And so when you do that, all you're really wanting to have confirmed is, have I chosen a good path here or not? And that prayer will happen a lot in the beginning because you won't know everything that you'll need to know in order to know that on your own. And so let me ask you a question based on what I've said. Should you worry right here at the beginning of going into your education, because this is still future for you, are you supposed to be worried about making the best choice among the available choices?
No.
And tell me why. Because you're not equipped to do it. Right. You're not equipped to do that. God's not going to magically tell you which one of those any more than he was going to tell you which path was good. That's what the whole education is about, right? I mean, if you're just going to do it for somebody, why make them go to school? So there you go. All right. So how does God make us aware if our decisions are wise and proper and sound and if they're on a good path without us just guessing that it's a good path? And how in the world will we know what he considers to be a good path and what he considers to be an evil path? Now, I want you to keep in mind as I start to explain this, because there's a couple of pendulum swings here that will take my answer way further in two different directions than it should go. And I'm going to point both of those out. And I am going to hold our feet to the fire on this, because this mishandled can become very dangerous. And I want to make sure that if you're going to do this, you're going to do it right. But I'm going to remind you now, all I'm doing is drawing up the play on the chalkboard. You're going to look at it now and you're going to be thinking, I still don't see exactly how that works. Well, when you get out on the field in Romans 12:3, we're going to talk exactly about how that works, because now you're going to go from just hearing about it to doing it. Are you with me? So I understand that this isn't going to, make you feel 100% comfortable, but that's not what this is geared to do. This is geared to make you familiar with what Paul is talking about when he mentions the searching of the heart in the first place. And you're supposed to already have some knowledge about this and how it works. So when David is talking to his father about this, and he's gone over his day, and then he comes to talking about what he's going to be doing tomorrow. And by the way, that follows the perfect format that any father would talk to a son about. How'd it go today? And now what's your agenda for tomorrow? David is not asking his father for a better choice. He's just asking for a confirmation about something he has decided on his own. There is a great biblical example of this. I think if I show you this, this will help really solidify this in your thinking. The last epistle that Paul writes is the book of Philemon. That book is probably one of the least known books in the New Testament. I don't know if I've heard a handful of sermons on the book of Philemon in my whole life. And if you're not familiar with that book, because we're going to go there and just read a few selected verses, here's what's happened. There is, and I'll show you why I think it, Philemon is a fully educated son. In fact, he's a pastor. That's why his epistle sits at the end of the pastoral epistles behind Timothy and Titus. And he's a fully educated son. He has a slave whose name is Onesimus. Onesimus runs away, and when he does, he takes an amount of money with him. And he's on the run. But while he's on the run, he encounters this guy called the Apostle Paul. And Onesimus gets saved. And he so loves Paul that even though Paul is in prison at the time that he writes this, Onesimus is a tremendous help to Paul. And Paul's going to testify to that. And at some point, Onesimus comes clean and says, I'm a runaway slave from a guy named Philemon. And Paul goes, Philemon Johnson? And he goes, yeah. And he goes, I know him. He's a great friend of mine. In fact, I led him to the Lord, just like I did you. And Onesimus goes, well, I've run away and I took some money and I spent it. And Paul says, I would love to have you stay here and help me, but you're going to have to go back. But when you go back, you're going to carry a letter with you. And I'm going to write a letter and you're going to carry this back. And so that's the background for what we're about to see. So let's take a look in Philemon 1. There's only one chapter in the book, but here it is, verse 1. Paul, a prisoner of Jesus Christ, and Timothy our brother, unto Philemon, our dearly beloved and fellow laborer. He not only knows Philemon, man, he's close to this guy, right? So what I'm going to do now is jump you over to verse 4. I thank my God, by the way, that fellow laborer thing and the things he's about to say here is what indicates to me that Philemon is a fully educated son, just like Timothy. By the way, I believe all those pastors that Paul had under him, I believe he made sure that they were qualified to assume that office. I thank my God, making mention of thee always in my prayers, hearing of thy love and faith, which thou hast toward the Lord Jesus Christ and toward all saints, that the communication of thy faith may become effectual by the acknowledging of every good thing which is in you in Christ Jesus. That is a statement, isn't it? I mean, so verse 7, for we have great joy and consolation in thy love, because the bowels of the saints are refreshed by thee, brother. And what he means by that is, he said, you know what? When people hear from you, they're encouraged. The people that are around you really are refreshed because of what's in you. Now, he's going to change this thing. I want to skip you over to verse 10. Now he's going to talk about Onesimus. Enough of the niceties. I beseech thee for my son Onesimus. Is Onesimus a son by blood? No. He's talking about a son in the faith, just like he referred to Timothy. He has led Onesimus to faith in Christ. I beseech thee for my son Onesimus, whom I have begotten in my bonds. I'm here in prayer. Now, we don't know how Onesimus ran into Paul. We don't know how that arranged, but it happened. And he says, verse 11, which in time past was to thee unprofitable, but now profitable to thee and to me. Now, he's going to introduce this change. Verse 12. Whom I have sent again. I'm sending him back to you. Thou therefore receive him, that is, mine own bowels, whom I would have retained with me, that in thy stead he might have ministered unto me in the bonds of the gospel. Paul's saying, I know you can't be here to help me. He was sure here to help me. And the guy was a help. Verse 14. But without thy mind, I would do nothing. You know what Paul recognizes? Philemon's an adult son. He's not going to be able to just step in and take charge. He may be the apostle, but he understands the principles of sonship and respects those. But without thy mind would I do nothing, that thy benefit should not be as it were of necessity, but willingly. Now he says, I am going to ask you something, but I understand it's your choice, and I want you to do it not because you feel like you have to, but because you're really willing to do this. Verse 15, for perhaps he therefore departed for a season, that thou shouldest receive him forever. Not now as a servant, but above a servant, a brother beloved, specially to me, and how much more unto thee, both in the flesh and in the Lord. If thou count me therefore a partner, receive him as myself. If he hath wronged thee or oweth thee aught, put that on mine account. I, Paul, have written it with my own hand. I will repay it. Albeit, I do not say to thee how thou owest unto me, even thine own self besides. I'm sorry, Paul. You did say it. Yeah. You know, it's kind of like, you know, someone saying, you know, I'm asking you to do this for me, and I'm not even going to mention the fact that if it weren't for me, you'd be on your way to hell. But don't feel obligated or anything. You know, I think Paul is grinning when he writes this. I do. I think he's grinning when he writes it. And by the way, I also think he understands that Philemon's going to receive it just the way he's written it. And when he's talking here, now we have a little more to look at, but here's the thing. He's explained what this situation is, and he has asked Philemon to do something, but here's the point I want to make to kind of wrap this up. Philemon has a lot of good paths in front of him. In other words, legally he can do a lot of things. When this guy comes back, having run away and stolen from him, what is the worst that could happen to Onesimus? Yeah, he could be put to death for that. So, and would that be perfectly legal under the? Absolutely, absolutely. That's a choice. But Philemon could also receive him back and say, okay, Paul, you owe me the money. You know what? But I'm going to have him put in prison. Could he do that? Sure. What about if he said, you're going to pay me the money back and I'm not going to put him in prison, but I'm not going to receive him as a brother. He's still a slave and he's going to have to, or you know what? He's going to work and repay the money himself. Paul, I don't want you. He could do that. Or he could say, I'm going to forgive him the debt, and Paul, you don't owe me anything, but you know what? He is a slave. He could do that. Or he could do what Paul asked. You can free him, and you can forgive him the debt. And now treat him as a brother. And Paul already knows what Philemon is going to do. But those are all the good paths that are in front of Philemon. And I don't know for sure, because it's not recorded here, that if Philemon were to look at those paths, I really don't think he's asking his father to search his heart over this, because as a fully educated son, I think he knows exactly what his father would do. He would do what he did for you. He'd forgive him and then treat him in a whole different relationship. And so the last verse that I'll show you on this is this. Yea, brother, let me have joy of thee in the Lord. Refresh my bowels in the Lord, having confidence in thy obedience. I wrote unto thee, knowing that thou wilt also do more than I say. Now, we don't have a P.S. on the end of this where Philemon says, yes, I did all that. But Paul's saying, I'm sure I've said this, I think you'll do more. Because I think Philemon understands the value now of taking Onesimus, as a brother in the faith and as a son in the education. And I think that's a fitting book to end the pastoral epistles, because here's what you have, is you have a guy that has a lot of choices in front of him, and there's one best choice. And by this time, Philemon can do what you can't do when you're first doing this. All you're doing here is determining a good path. Philemon is able to prove things which are excellent, and that's a Philippians passage. He's able to know not just which ones are good, he's knowing, I know which one my father would do, and he knows why. Now, with that in mind, I'm going to use the last part of the session to give you the answers now of the things that you've been wondering about in the searching of the heart. I'm going to introduce it to you now here at the end. And then when I come back the next time, I'm going to nail all of that down and make sure there's no misunderstanding. So I'm going to walk very slowly and carefully here. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain both of those pendulum swings which are wrong off of this. Because if this really is a two-way communication with your father, if I'm right about that, David talks about it that way. And if I'm right about that, then you're not only going to say something to your father, but he is going to have to say something back to you. This is called the searching of the what. And so that's an indicator of how you're going to receive an answer. Now that scares me to death. Do you know why? Because people will take that to mean whatever I envision God to be saying is what he's going to be saying. But that's not true. That's not it at all. This gets nailed down a lot better than that. By the way, I was talking to Ron last week after the study, and I said, God does everything through his word, and he does. So let me tell you, because your sonship is the third component of your sanctification, God has already been dealing with you in this very way. In fact, when he talked to you about you're dead to sin and alive unto God, the first two components of your sanctified life, now, let me illustrate it like this. A man told me last week, he said, he runs a business and there's a lot of oil field guys that come by and they buy fuels and all kinds of things from his business. And the guy came by and he said, you know what, you're selling a lot of stuff here. He said, what we want to do is we want to be able to buy all this other stuff, but when you write it up on the ticket, we need you to list it as fuel so that we can use the company credit card to pay for it. But it was for their own personal use. And the guy said, I can't do that. And the guy said, well, you'll either do it or we'll take all of the company business somewhere else. He said, well, then you're going to have to take it somewhere else. Now, this man is not involved in sonship, but I'm using this to show you how you already know about this. When I told that story, did anybody here have any trouble knowing that what they were asking him to do was wrong? You knew that already, didn't you? And you know how you knew that? Based on other things you had already learned about right and wrong. You didn't make an arbitrary decision. You didn't guess at it, did you? Well, I don't know if that's wrong. Of course you know it's wrong. Did those guys know it was wrong? Yes. And that's why they didn't go through the company to do it. They tried to, leverage the guy they're buying from. Of course they knew it was wrong. And do you know where you knew it was wrong? In your heart, in your inner man. No one had to tell you, because there's something you have learned already that lets you see that and know already. Did you have to go to a Bible verse? That's right. But it may have been based on something that you were taught out of the Bible. Yes? That's why I told you it's important. Don't pull this out of the framework for which it's intended. It's a very precise thing. It's intended as you deal with the 4 decision-making skills. Here you are learning the first 6 components of godly wisdom, and you're going to be learning some things in that. As you are learning those things in the arena in which all of those 6 components are taught, you're going to have that nailed down. But then you're going to come along and say, I think I can apply one of these to a completely different area of my life. And now you're going to ask your Father, is this a good path for me or not? And you're going to get an answer in your heart based on what you have already learned. Because here's how this is going to happen. It's almost as if you're going to ask your Father, here's what I'm thinking, do you see anything wrong with that? A while ago when I said that illustration, every one of you inside, something clicked and you thought to yourself, that's not right. And that's exactly the way you're going to get an answer from your Father in the searching of the heart. And when you declare to Him what you're going to do, it's not in a vacuum. Please. It's not you dreaming up His answer. It's not what you want to hear. It's going to work just like the illustration I just gave you. You're going to learn some things that if what you're thinking is not a good path, when your Father searches your heart, if it's not a good path, there's going to be a check on the inside that tells you this isn't right. On the other hand, if it's okay, you know what you're going to hear? Nothing. There's nothing to correct. So if you ever heard that thing, can I do it? And they don't say anything, I'll take that as a yes. Well, I have to put it in that context. But if your Father has anything about this, that's the time for Him to give you the signal. And it won't just come out. Listen, it's not magic. I just hate this part. Because we're drawing it up on the chalkboard, and right now, you're going to think every fanciful thought because you've never done it. It's never happened for you. And because of that, you could turn this into a wildfire real easy. You understand what I'm saying? Or you could dismiss it as a wildfire. What I'm trying to get through is you're actually going to be taught a doctrine that when it effectually works in your inner man, your Father can then take what you do know and bring that to your mind to discover that which you didn't think about before. I'm thinking about this in a wrong way. If you don't hear anything about that, then you're going to proceed on with what you have decided to do. Does that make some sense? Now, again, I know that this sounds really strange, but it's the searching of your heart. Otherwise, what are you going to depend on? A voice from heaven? A sign? I'm going to go read a verse? Well, which one? Who's going to decide that? And yet, the only alternative is to say, well, God's not going to do anything. I'm telling you, this works. Now, you've got to trust, can you trust, that your Father can utilize what you've learned to let you know? Look, it just happened a moment ago. I illustrated it for you. Not a person in the room didn't understand there was something wrong with what was going on. You look at that, you don't have any problem with that. I don't want you to have a problem with this. It's going to work the same way. That's going to be, you say, well, that one's pretty obvious. Once you've learned this, it's going to be pretty obvious. Right now, I'm telling you about something that you can't do because you haven't been taught this. It's not divorced from the Word. So I got to make this statement. If this doctrine doesn't effectually work in you, you're not getting any answer. If all you're doing is memorizing data, you're not getting any answer. This really has to be, you understand now why that's so critical. This has to be in you. Now, probably raised way more questions than I've answered up to this point. But this is how this works. And when you ask your Father to search your heart, you have to say, can I trust Him that if something I'm not thinking about this right, He really is going to bring that up? That's, again, not magic. If He does, then you've got to know that's Him at work. Now, are you going to get better at this as you go along? Of course you will. But in the beginning, again, this is not about which one of these paths is the best path. This is about, is this a good path or is it not? That's all that's about. I could give you a list right now of things that are so obvious, you wouldn't even need that education to determine what was a good path and a bad path. Well, it's going to happen that same way here. So what are the two pendulum swings? One of them is to say, that sounds like it's too much out of the Word, and I can't go with that. I understand that. I have that. You know, I think God does everything. But this is not divorced from His Word. The check that you get in your inner man is going to come out of what you know. I'm not saying you don't know anything about it, but God's just going to magically let you know, or you're going to guess about it. That is never going to happen one time. Are you with me? You're just out of the system on that. That's just never going to happen. This is based on what you will have been taught in the curriculum. So, and you're not going to go around going, you know, I prayed and asked the Father to search my heart, and I just have this little idea. I just don't really can't put my finger on it. Well, then you know what you're doing? You're just out there in the ozone, sniffing the gas that's coming up out of the ground, because that's not what this is about. That's a West Texas expression, by the way. But that's not it. This is going to come to you based on something you know. And here's the other pendulum swing. Oh, well, if He's just going to speak to my heart, then whatever I think He's saying, then that's what He's saying. That's not it either. This is very dangerous, because both of these errors are prolific in this country. And so we've got to nail this down for what it is, not what you and I want it to be. I have to tell you honestly, if I was the one coming up with this, I wouldn't have designed it this way, but I would have been wrong. But I'm too scared of the error. I wouldn't have designed it this way, because I'd have looked at that and I said, you know how people are, Lord? You know how many ways they're going to mess this up? I'm going to tell you how many ways. How many people are there? This is how many ways they're going to mess this thing up. And you know that's true. Now, but if we're going to get this right, look, this is the searching of the heart. That's all this is for, is determining if this is a good path. And you're going to have to trust that if it's not a good path, it's not about which job I take. Are you with me? Yes. It's not about, do I buy a new car or not? Do I want the red one or the blue one? I want the Jag or the whatever, okay? It's not about that kind of thing. It's about, here's what I've decided to do tomorrow. Is this a good path? Yes or no? And when you ask him to search your heart, if you don't have something called to you based on what you have learned, that is the signal for you to proceed on. But when you get that, I call it that, that check. Yeah, thank you. When you get that, that's not going to be some mystical, unidentifiable thing. You won't be saying, I just feel like it. It doesn't matter how you feel. That's the wrong application of it. You're going to be able to put your... Why was the guy right to say, I'm not going to sell you this other stuff and act like it's fuel? Why is that wrong? Okay, all of those answers are right. You put your finger on it. That's how much you're going to be able to put your finger on this. And if you can't put your finger on it, guess what? That's not your father. Are you with me? Now, I'm trying to nail this thing down, but again, I know this is like talking about shifting a standard, and you may be looking at it going, I just don't understand how you know how much gas to give it and how much to let out on that. I just don't know how you know. Well, one day when you get behind the wheel and it actually works, then you'll go, you know what? You just understand this is how this works in this car. Yeah, it is. It's a very nuanced thing, but you know what's going on with it. You know if you rev that engine to 7,000 RPMs and pop that clutch out, that's a bad path. And you're going to know why. So as we end this session, all I'm really trying to do is establish for you, how am I going to know if my father is confirming or denying this? Because he is going to call something up that comes out of this.
But we'll know because of the effectual working of...
Only if that has effectually worked in you will he be able to do that.
That's right.
Have you ever, let me give you an example. Have you ever made a decision and you said, here's what I think I'm going to do, and you've gone blah, 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 and you said it to your buddy, and your buddy goes, well, what about this? And you go, well, I didn't think about that. Have you ever been there?
Yes.
All right, here's your father's going to be the one going, well, what about that? You can think about it. Now, am I saying you're not incapable? You understand, you've learned some things. You're not incapable of choosing a good path. Is it possible for you to get a right path? Well, of course it is. That's what the education is geared to do. But is it also possible, I know no one in this group, but is it possible for you to get out into the universe in left field with an aspect of that and carry that to a place that your father never really meant for that to be carried? Well, that's possible. And you want to know from him, am I headed in the right direction or not? So it's not really a thing about a vote or what the world thinks. This is really going to be based on the education itself. And you're not going to encounter that until we get over there. But when we do, that is the process that you're going to employ. Now you know how it works. You need to also know that the more you get used to that, the easier that gets, because it's very fish out of water to you right now. And I realize that. But I am telling you that this works. So if you'll just bear with me as we go through this, all I'm trying to do here is give you a general knowledge of this without us getting off base with it, okay? I know that we would, there's just not another way to get it done, by the way. If you just think about it, there's just really not another way that you can objectively get that done without believing that God is actually going to do what he said he's going to do. Okay, so there's where we are. Look, you got 4 minutes early. You're going to get out. Don't tell me that I'm always over.
Mike, when you brought up about the $89,000 vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason that would have been a bad path for John is because John didn't have $89,000.
That's correct.
It would put him deeply in debt and probably maybe mess up his marriage, which is very bad path. But somebody that was a multi-millionaire or could afford to write a check for $89,000 or whatever, that would be considered a good path.
For them?
For them.
And that's what France was saying earlier. That's a different deal.
We're talking about the different paths for different people. It's not.
But that's why that's a bad illustration
I
too.
know,
Yeah.
I know, but there's, I can see how where you're going in this.
Right.
It's easy. I mean,
Okay. Okay. Well, good.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Any questions about this?
I think it's just hard because we've always been taught that, especially when you talk about being intimate with your father. We always think of an audible connection, an audible relationship.
Right.
And that's what makes it very, especially even to the point where we were saying, search my heart and everything, it was kind of still leading me in that direction, even though I knew that wasn't the way it was supposed to, but in a way I was still waiting for this voice of God to be like, right, that's not.
I know there's this whole mystical element that we went down before with that, which is, and the only way searching your heart now is you're going to tell him. It's a very practical way. And how's he going to tell you? Well, he's not going to write it in the heavens. He's not going to speak an audible voice. There is only one way that that's going to come to you, and that is in the same way he has performed the rest of your sanctified life. And that concerned your understanding of dealing with sin. So this is in perfect harmony with that.
Yes. And all through the Bible, God tells us what he approves of and what he doesn't.
Well, there is a lot of that.
A lot of
And then you're going to come into situations that are just not listed in there, and you've got to use those principles. And then, of course, if you're not sure, search my heart, see if I'm right.
Many years ago, I really was questioning, Lord, how do I know? I'm seeking answers from you, and I really need to know. And inside of me spoke up and said, use peace as your compass.
Yes.
And I learned in following peace, I might not have known all the ins and the outs, but he was always there. I could trust the peace because I knew a lot of things, and he gave me peace in the things that I knew, and that I could just trust him.
Well, I understand what you're saying. Fortunately, he's going to go way beyond that even, yeah. But I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I know, I realized that, but what I'm saying, when I was first, this was, like I said, many years ago.
Oh, right.
And that was the first thing, because I didn't know.
Right.
I didn't have no learning, I didn't have no one taught me.
It's hard to know what you don't know, isn't it? Right. Tommy?
Well, I think we're going to get an opportunity in about 30 seconds to put this all to a test because it's a blessing jar.
Wait, I'm sorry. Something was happening. I didn't hear you. Say that again. Okay. All right.
I think we end it with knowing that thou will also do more than I say.
Yeah! Subliminally highlighted. Okay. All right. I love y'all. God bless you. We'll see you in 2 weeks, okay?